Welcome to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger. At Press Coverage, I want to bring in the sharpest guests, and I want to identify the edges to help you win in fantasy. And one of my underutilized tools in terms of preparing for next season is looking into my crystal ball. And today I'm bringing in two guys who seriously know ball, and that's Cody Carpentier and Matty Kiwoom. And this episode, we're not going to dive into analytics. We're not going to dive into team structure. We're going to dive into looking into the future, and we're going to identify this year's version of several players who hit at ADP. Last year was a unbelievable year for guys just breaking through, guys like Sam LaPorta, guys like Jordan Love, guys like Puka Nacua. We're going to attempt to find this year's version of those players, and we're going to look back at a couple of previous seasons for other guys who absolutely smashed their ADP. But Matty Kiwoom, Cody Carpentier, guys, welcome in Press Coverage. First time I've had you both here together. Matty Kiwoom, what do you have going on these days, man?
Man, the grind is real. It might be the NFL slow season, but over here we are still grinding it out. You know, get the game plan every Saturday, Trade Gods Wednesday night, the hurdle with Cody, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, TDR pod, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays over at thedraftrankings.com. We got a ton going on. It's nice to finally come on here, OG. We've potted quite a bit, and now you finally extended the invite to your boy. I'm very excited for today.
You've been all over the place, but yeah, actually Press Coverage. This is the first time in there for Matty Kiwoom. Cody Carpentier, not your first time on Press Coverage. This is, I think it's like your third time on Press Coverage. So welcome back. And Matty talked about the hurdle and the draft rankings. Why don't you talk a little bit about those projects? Because I think a lot of people know you with like what you're doing with Roster Watch. But why don't you talk about those two new shows? Because they're super cool.
Yeah, the hurdle is on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights. Me and Matty get together on Tuesday night. You can find that one on Player Profile and on the Executives of Fantasy Football YouTube channel. And then Matty and Seth join on Wednesdays and talk about Dynasty. It's just pods where we just like a Tuesday, we want to talk about just NFL. We want to talk about the draft. We want to talk about football-based things. Wednesday, we talk Dynasty. So it kind of meshes both worlds. And then the Draft Rankings podcast, you can find it on podcast and on video on YouTube if you just type in the Draft Rankings podcast. But that's more so where we just want to focus in. Like in Mondays, it's a solo show where we talk about one thing. I want to talk about all the quarterbacks next year. I want to talk about all the, the movement in free agency. And Wednesday, me and Matty talk about the news of the week. And then Friday, we get together for like a scouting show. And we're like breaking down, like we're at the scouting table, in the war room, in with the general manager, trying to sell him. You've seen the videos that come out. Everyone has seen them. All 32 teams have put out videos about, a scout trying to sell, a GM on this player. And that's exactly what we do in that show. We sit down, the three of us, like a round table. And I'm like, man, this is why I think Shedeur Sanders should be our pick here at number 5. What he brings to the table, what his entire makeup is from what we've seen so far, right? He's got a whole nother season to go in the 2025 draft, but that's kind of what that show is resembled around. And that's just kind of how we want to bridge the gap between draft and fantasy and draft.
I love it. And again, highly recommend everything these guys are putting out. Saturdays right here on YouTube, Matty Kiwoom. These guys together on the hurdle is absolutely fire. And all the work you guys are doing over at Roster Watch, I find myself like tuning in when you guys do the live streams on Twitter. There's been some really good stuff with Alex and also the Trash Man. How could you not want to watch everything the Trash Man has to say in June? But let's start it out, guys. We're going to talk about the NFL. Go ahead, Cody.
I was just going to say, I know you started
the Eric Gray stuff.
Listen, I know you've been in the streets in the high stakes drafts already, and I know you've already been drafting some Eric Gray because of the Trash Man.
The Trash Man talking about Eric Gray when you have Tyrone Tracy, it made me angry. And then like 2 weeks later, we get these reports out of camp about Eric Gray. So it feels a little, I'll tell you what it feels a little like. It feels a little bit like Chris Evans, Samaje Perine a couple years ago in Cincinnati, where every single person who was on like fantasy Twitter, people who were tape grinders, everybody was like, this kid Chris Evans is a baller. He's going to pass by Samaje Perine. You need to draft Chris Evans. And then like this guy, Samaje Perine, the coach is like, and then all of a sudden Samaje Perine is like just like dust Chris Evans. So I've fallen in love with like these day 3 backs in the past, and it comes back to hurt you. But again, you're only burning like 19th round, picks and stuff like that. So I haven't drafted any Eric Gray yet, Cody. I'm all right.
For those listening, I have no idea what a Trash Man is or who Trash Man is. I'm just going to give you one quick bit here. This is a guy that was the opposite of everybody in the fantasy community, was not in on N'Keal Harry. He had him as like wide receiver 6 coming out in that draft class. Everybody else had him 1, 2, 3 up there with AJ Brown. He's always been off of N'Keal Harry. Last week we did a podcast and he said, I love me some N'Keal Harry switching to tight end. And the whole pod about turned into a tizzy because ain't nobody in on N'Keal Harry anymore. But that's trash man. That's what he does. He's that type of disgusting, despicable takes from the trash man on a weekly basis. So just to give the people, the listeners have no idea who that is. It's trash. It's trash takes.
It's a nice balance between everybody here knows Cody, and then most people at Player Profiler know Alex Dunlap. So it's a nice little balance with what you guys are doing. But let's talk about it because, you know, we talked about this kind of subject, you know, when we were in NFL draft season. But now we've started to see OTAs. We're starting to see like the slow drip, the media reports. It's constant. Right now, Matty Kiwoom, if you could know the final stats of any single player this season, who would it be?
For me, it would be Drake London of any single player because now he's crept up to wide receiver 10. You're having to invest a whole lot to get him on your team. And the fact of the matter is he is the only wide receiver on this roster who does not have a 1,000-yard season. Darnell Milne has. So I need to know. I need to know before I invest as much in Drake London. Need to.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one because I think Drake London, it's sort of like assume this is the next, you know, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs like output for a Kirk Cousins wide receiver. It could burn you. And there's a lot of options right behind Drake London at wide receiver, which also makes sort of like clicking the button there difficult. But then the upside case is he goes nuts. It's 145 targets and, you know, you see some real alpha stuff. So agreed. He's a big swing, a big like range of outcomes guy, I think. But I'm going to have some Drake London, I think. Cody Carpentier, which guy are you looking at if you're trying to pick a veteran player where you can know their final stats right now?
The veteran for me, I was stuck on 2 player names here. I'm going to go with one, but I'm going to name drop the other one. I'm going to go Chris Olave. If I could know what this New Orleans offense looks like this year, I think it would go far in telling me whether I should or shouldn't be drafting Chris Olave. He's going off the board right now as wide receiver 11. It feels a tad rich. I've always loved Chris Olave coming through the process. It was him and Garrett Wilson. Me and Alex had way too many conversations about that. But it was never in the thesis of, yeah, this man's got, 1,700, 1,600 as an upside, like his ability to be a number 1 overall in football. It was always, we know he's going to hit that 1,000-yard marker. We know you're going to get something in between like a Tyler Lockett, a Brendan Cook, somewhere in that like 900 to 1,200 and probably 6-7 touchdowns. And it feels like he's being drafted at that and maybe a little higher than where he should be. So if I could get that data point down and be like, yep, we know he's going to come in at X, it would really help me to know whether I should be taking him here or shouldn't be. And the other name that I have written down is Zay Flowers in Baltimore. What is this? What is it? Is this going to be the vault up where he becomes the alpha and he should be drafted at wide receiver 10, 11? He's going off right now at wide receiver 25. That's the other one I'm interested in.
Love the Zay Flowers answer. I actually made a prediction. I think Zay Flowers is going to catch more passes than any single Ravens wide receiver since Derek Mason. And I think he's going to actually take that big step forward. He looked fantastic in that playoff game. I think that the people remember the fumble, but like that was a guy that they were featuring in a must-win game, and they were going to him, and he looked terrific. So I think Zay Flowers does take a real big step forward. The Todd Monken offense is a little bit more nuanced than what we've seen in Baltimore. And also Lamar was very pass happy last year. So I think there's a chance he could be a real target monster. I love the Zay Flowers call, and I love the Drake London call. How about rookies? We've been doing this for a while, guys. And now the rookies, like, you're starting to see some new names creeping up, guys that are getting a little bit of buzz here. Matty Kiwoom, who's a rookie you have your eye on right now that you'd love to know the final stats for?
So you guys remember the show Squid Games on Netflix, that game where they had to step on the glass and it would break?
Where are you going with this one, Matty Kiwoom? Where are you going with this one?
This is what I'm saying is that I need to know which pane of glass is sturdy in my first round of rookie drafts. So Brock Bowers is the guy whose stats I need to know, because if I'm going to invest a 105 in one QB, if I'm going to get that top 8 draft capital, that golden zone of draft capital in terms of rookie picks, I got to know, am I getting someone who could produce now, or am I having a Kyle Pitts situation where you got to just kind of ride the wave? I need to know.
His ADP is a little closer to what we saw with like Dalton Kincaid during steam up last year. Like Dalton Kincaid, especially tight end premium, both those guys have steamed up. I think that you're paying a little bit because people saw it with LaPorta last year, like without a doubt. Like Brock Bowers, the whole like we have to be patient with rookie tight ends. That's completely out the window. Also, when they're showing like OTA highlights and he's getting like manufactured carries and all sorts of like hype, it's not hurting the situation. So with you on that one to an extent, I think he's worth it to draft at his current cost, especially if you're high volume, because of the upside that's there. And we might talk a little bit about Mr. Bowers later on in the show. Cody, who's a rookie who right now you're like, I'm dying to know how he finishes the season?
Unfortunately, Matty, there's only one answer to this, and I think you're wrong, because Bowers tight end 11, I'll take it anytime, any day of the week. The answer here,
no. I put that.
There's only one.
Context. This is a rookie draft context, Cody. This was not overall.
He said, "Give me." He said, "Give me the statistic."
Give me a rookie that you'd like to know, and this is why I'd like to know him.
No context. He said, "Give me the final stats of any rookie. Who would it be?"
Yeah.
I said, "There's only
there's
only one answer."
And why it would be that?
The answer is Malik Nabers. That's it. Because nobody knows what the hell this Giants offense is going to be. We've talked about it before the show. Some of the offenses you're potentially looking at, we look at every year, and that offense is going to suck nuggets, and it becomes something. Nabers, we know we had him ranked as the wide receiver 1. A good group of people did in the pre-draft process, and he lands in the shit situation. And we've already seen the highlights of OTAs and mini camps of Malik Nabers. And I'll give it to you in the context of rookie drafts. I get you. You can go in top 5. You need to know what that's worth. However, we've already done our rookie drafts, but going into the season, Malik Nabers is at wide receiver 20 right now in this bad offense. And it's just expected that he's going to get all these targets and expected that he's going to catch all these passes from these bad quarterbacks in Drew Lock and Daniel Jones. Am I going to get a 700-yard season, or am I going to get a 1,300-yard season? I need to know that today. I need to know that now for Malik Nabers if I'm drafting, because you're getting him a wide receiver 20, and that's either what it is it's right in the middle, and it's either going to be super wrong because it's going to be low, or it's going to be super wrong because it's too high. He's either going to be wide receiver 35 or wide receiver 9. Like, that's just what it feels like for Malik Nabers, what he's going to be. We just need to figure out what that is.
3 appearances on press coverage, and you have the wrong answer. Good job, Cody.
No, Malik Nabers. I like the Malik Nabers one.
The wrong answer.
I mean, I'm on the. I need to have a good amount of Malik Nabers exposure, especially in best ball. I think that if just looking at that roster, how do you not walk away with him getting 145 target floor with like 165 target ceiling? He's so dynamic. They're so lacking of target volume type players. I mean, you can make an argument that Wandell is going to get his targets this year. But other than that, it's like a bunch of dudes. And even the running back situation, it's like Devin Singletary has one season in his career with more than 200 carries. It's not like he's going to be some high volume, workhorse. And we talked about the backup situation. As much as we like Tyrone Tracy, it's Tyrone Tracy versus Eric Gray. It's 2 late day 3 types competing behind Singletary. So it's got to be Malik Nabers this year. And that's an interesting topic. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about some of these big ADP hits, but perceived bad offenses create ADP opportunities. It happens every single year in terms of beating the market. We're going to take a quick break, and we come back, we're diving into it. We're going to start it off with this year's Jordan Love. We'll be right back.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February and Dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest and bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
Welcome back to Press Coverage. And we're going to start at the quarterback position, guys. The quarterback position for the last 2 seasons has had a ton of ADP wins from like lower drafted players. And the market every year kind of changes the quarterback spot. But 2022, we saw Justin Fields finish inside of like QB5, QB6 land. We saw Trevor Lawrence inside of like QB7, QB8. We saw Geno Smith finish inside of like the top 6. All three of those players obviously were huge ADP wins. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields coming off of disappointing rookie seasons took big steps forward. Geno Smith was like left for dead. People talked about Geno Smith versus Drew Lock, who was going to win the job. Geno ends up crushing, and it kind of raises tides for all these Seattle players won at ADP last year. And last year was also the case, guys. We saw Baker Mayfield, Sam Howell. We also saw Jordan Love and Dak Prescott. Now, certainly the Baker Mayfield, Sam Howell, those guys were like low-end QB1s, but Dak Prescott was helping people win leagues, and Jordan Love ends up giving you like top 5 quarterback production. All of them were huge ADP steals. So let's start off with looking for this year's Jordan Love. Now, this would be an archetype of a low-end QB2 with some unknown upside that ends up finishing easily inside QB1 land. Let's start with you, Matty Kiwoom. Who's a player who could be this year's Jordan Love?
So I think you have to start where, the guy who mentored Jordan Love, and that's Aaron Rodgers, QB 20 off the board right now. He's going to have to throw over 35 touchdowns. He's going to have to eclipse that 4,000-yard mark. But on this Jet squad with Garrett Wilson, with Malachi Corley, Mike Williams, Tyler Conklin, and Breece Hall, I think he's going to have the weaponry, and they're going to need him in a pretty tough schedule this year to be the Aaron Rodgers of old. We saw him finish as QB8 on a points per game basis just a few years ago in 2021. So if you're looking for a guy, in the 15 to 20 range at QB that could creep into that top 12, even top 10, Aaron Rodgers, we got to start.
I like that one a lot, Matty Kiwoom, and it's I was doing some research on this. The bottom 5 scoring teams in the NFL, the Jets over the last 2 years have averaged 17.4 points per game and 15.8 points per game. Like Aaron Rodgers, this would be, if he's able to come in and finish with that sort of output, then you want to draft Garrett Wilson in literally every single draft you're in. He's the cheat code in the steal. I love that one. Cody, who's a very mispriced quarterback that you could see in a sort of Jordan Love-like outcome?
Well, I was going to be honest with you. I wrote 2 names down. Matty just took one of them, and the other one, Player Profiler Nation, knows exactly where I'm going here. Quarterback 24. This guy got all the weaponry in the world as upgrades this year for fantasy football for the NFL. He got offensive linemen. He got a couple guys on defense, but mainly and most importantly, he got wide receivers. He got Calvin Ridley. He gets Tyler Boyd. Jaquan Jackson's an underrated deep depth piece at the wide receiver position. That's Will Levis. Will Levis is the answer here. It's, I love the Rodgers connection, but he's also aged. When you're talking about the answer, the young cat, the 24-year-old at the quarterback position that has a year under his belt in this situation with the new coaching staff coming over from Cincinnati, Will Levis is primed to be that guy. Like we watched what Green Bay did with Jordan Love. They had running backs, right? They had A.J. Dillon. They had Aaron Jones. They had an offensive line that was built together. It wasn't completely put together because they had David Bakhtiari, who's missed the last couple of seasons, so they were plugging pieces in all over. And this is kind of what Tennessee's doing. They've been drafting pieces. They're plugging pieces in. At the wide receiver position, they had the youngest receiving core we've seen in the last decade in Green Bay. And this year, Tennessee kind of did the opposite. They went out and added some 29, 30-year-olds. But those are guys we've seen do it in the NFL. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd have 1,000-yard seasons. So everything's there for Will Levis to do it in 2024. And he's going off the board at QB 24 when it could easily vault him into that top 10.
Yeah, and I've had like arguments with Cody here on Will Levis, but for this particular question, it's Will Levis. Because Will Levis, when you talk about Jordan Love, it's sort of like the unknown upside of drafting him. Will Levis, it's the first time we've seen him in this sort of system. Like playing with Derrick Henry is completely different than what he's going to be into this year with Callahan as the head coach. Like Cody talked about, I think the wide receiver additions, shoring up the offensive line, and then also he's going to get so many like easy low A-dot dump off type throws to Tony Pollard and also Tyjae Spears. So like instead of handing off to Derrick Henry and establishing that run in the first half, they're going to be establishing the pass and getting him into that rhythm early on. So Will Levis, it's common for people to say it. And I actually think, Cody, that ADP is going to improve over the summer. I bet you by the time people are drafting in August and September, Will Levis is probably going to be going like quarterback 18, 19. It just feels that way with the vibes. It's a vibes feel more than anything. Let's talk about Matty Kiwoom. We'll start you out with this one. Baker Mayfield. And let's leave Sam Howell out of this one because I think Sam Howell is a little bit different archetype. But last year, Baker Mayfield finished inside of the top 12 at the quarterback position. The year before, Geno Smith gave you like a top 5 quarterback finish. Both of these guys are sort of in the left for dead zone. Bad offenses. Both of these guys you were getting outside of QB2 land, and they both provided incredible returns. And like we talked about, they are able to raise multiple players on their team. You know, we're going to talk about Mike Evans a little later on the show, but Mike Evans, Rachaad White. With Seattle that year, it was DK, Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was drafted as like a wide receiver 5. He ends up finishing as like a wide receiver 15 that year. So let's talk about a veteran who is going to crush his ADP and also could raise, the outcomes of several players around him.
I'm actually going to stick in your home state there, OG. I'm going to go with the quarterback of the New York Giants, Daniel Jones, who right now is QB 29. We just talked about, Cody, you started talking about Malik Nabers and his potential and what is now, this is by far his best pass catcher that he's had. And then 2 years ago, on just 15 passing touchdowns, Daniel Jones was QB 10 on a points per game basis because he had 700 rushing yards. So we know that the mobility is there. Malik Nabers is not the cure-all, so I do think the rushing potential is still on the board. But then just having a weapon like Malik that can turn a 4-yard slant into a 72-yard touchdown run. Those are the type of fantasy chunks that we can't really project, but we can potentially, bank on just knowing the talent of the players around him. Daniel Jones right now coming off the board, QB 29. You're getting him super late amongst the quarterbacks, and a guy that has not only been QB 10 on a points per game basis before, but QB 15, QB 17 as well. So he has flirted with that QB 2 status multiple times throughout his career, and now has really put up or shut up for his entire career as a starter in the league. So Daniel Jones, I'm not happy about it. It makes me kind of sick to my stomach. The green face emoji is what comes to mind when hitting the select button, the draft button of Danny Dimes. But I do think he has that upside. We've seen it before.
I love that one. And you could actually picture an outcome where it's like, Matty, he's going quarterback 29. So he doesn't have to finish inside of QB1 land. Let's say he finishes like QB 16, but it gives you a Malik Nabers at wide receiver 12. It gives you Devin Singletary running back 18. And it gives you a Wan'Dale Robinson is like your sneaky wide receiver 35, just based on the offense being better than we think. I'll say for me, you could go in a couple directions here. I do like the idea, and I'll give a shout out to Andrew Koopa Fiasco. He was here, and he brought up Russell Wilson as this year's Baker Mayfield. I could see that one. He's got good players around him. You got Jalen Warren out of the backfield. You got an alpha in Pickens, maybe Roman Wilson, and then a healthy Pat Freiermuth. And I think the offense is going to score some points. And again, Russell Wilson's quarterback 32. He could beat his ADP by 15 spots if everything goes well, and he can keep Justin Fields off the field. But I like that Daniel Jones one. That was clever. Cody Carpentier, who you got?
I got Russell Wilson. You say he could beat it by 15 spots. I think he can beat it by 20. He finished at quarterback 12 last year on a points per game basis. He had a rushing touchdown in 3 of the last 5 games of the season for Denver. Denver sucked. The win total for Pittsburgh right now is 8.5. This is one of my favorite teams coming in. You talked earlier about teams that are perceived to not be great and that can exceed expectations. Why are we doubting Mike Tomlin ever? You should never be doubting Mike Tomlin. When I go up to Latrobe here in about a month and a half, I guarantee those practices are going to be dialed in, and I guarantee you Roman Wilson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, this running game, this offensive line, Russell Wilson, it's going to be a well-oiled machine, and there's no damn reason that Justin Fields should be getting drafted ahead of Russell Wilson right now.
Both Cody and Matty have talked at length about the offensive line improvements we're going to see in Pittsburgh with some of the younger players. Highly recommend you check out their work to learn about the nuances. And Cody, that Latrobe trip, that sounds like a lot of fun, man. Let's keep it going. Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott last year gets pushed down into QB2 land. He was in sort of like the QB2 abyss, right around like QB 15, QB 16, sort of the unimpactful zone where people sort of didn't know what to do with Dak. Last year, the beginning of the season, it was a slow start because the defense was just ripping people's heads off. You think about the opening game against the Giants, against Matty Kiwoom's Daniel Jones, and that Dallas Cowboys defense just killed them. And Dak didn't do anything. But then Dak starts getting it going right after the bye week. Dak ends up giving you like top 4 QB production. And he had a long period of time where he was the QB1, like a 6-week stretch where he was QB1 overall in that time period, helping people win leagues and helping CeeDee Lamb finish as wide receiver 1 overall. When we're looking at a QB2 that can finish as a top 5 QB, who are we looking at, guys? Let's start with Cody on this one.
I want to flip the script here, and I want to ask you guys a couple questions to get to my answer here. If you have your returning offensive coordinator to your team, right? You have your returning receivers. You didn't lose anybody. You actually have a receiver in your team that is perceived to by the coaches gotten better. So we should listen to that, right? He's gotten better. We thought he was going to bust. He's gotten better. The entire offensive line is back. Your superstar tight end that was a rookie is now a sophomore. Your running backs are both still on the team. Your team was really good. And you finished as a quarterback 7 last year. Why are you being drafted at quarterback 16? Why? Jared Goff makes no sense. This is the answer for this because Jared Goff's drafted at quarterback 16 right now, an underdog, finished as quarterback 7 last year. Everything's there. Jameson Williams, again, we don't know if this is true or not. Dan Campbell, we just got to take it for what it is. He says Jameson Williams has turned the corner. He's been talking about Jameson Williams for 12 months, 13, 14 months about he needs more time. He needs more time. He needs more time. He needs more time. And now he's here supposedly. If that's true, what is stopping Jared Goff from screw top 5? What's stopping Jared Goff from being top 3 in fantasy points? Everything is back. They're running it back in this offense. Unless I'm missing something, I don't get it. I don't get this Jared Goff ADP.
Yeah, and I've been criticized for talking about the same guys every show on all my shows, but Jared Goff, I can't stop talking about. He's definitely the answer here for everything Cody said. Also, Cody, I'll throw out the fact that Ben Johnson comes back. They finished 5th overall in the NFL in back-to-back seasons in points per game. Why can't the Lions lead the NFL in scoring this year and take that like huge step forward? And not enough credit goes to Goff for playing with inexperienced weapons last year. We're talking about LaPorta was a rookie. Jahmyr Gibbs was a rookie. Jameson Williams was essentially a rookie, was hardly on the field as a rookie. So give him, kind of a unexperienced. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, definitely an alpha, but still a younger player. So now all those guys a year older, they could absolutely just go on a tear this year in Detroit. I'll also throw out Skinny Tua. Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback 14. The guy looks like he lost like 20. He looks like, does the Ozempic make you lightheaded on the field in the fourth quarter is the only question.
Not going to be good for him, getting a little concussion.
Well, look at Tua. Tua's 29 touchdown passes last year. We also see, this is year 3 for Mike McDaniel. Is it going to be a year where maybe Devon Achane is utilized as out of the backfield as a receiving weapon, like we talked about in the preseason last year, a little bit more, maybe adds a few touchdowns there. Jalen Waddle staying healthy and Tyreek Hill obviously on the field. Just based on the quality of the offense, it's sort of like a similar bet with Goff, but like Cody said, Goff is even cheaper than Tua. So I'm going to go with Goff as well. Matty Kiwoom, anybody else to add?
Yeah, I think you guys are right. Goff is the right answer, but I will add one more name because this is a guy that brings a little bit something else to the table. Right now, look at the top 5. It's riddled with guys with rushing upside. We saw Dak ascend in the top 5 without much rushing upside. The touchdown spike, the passing yard spike, but this guy is a player that has rushing upside. Trevor Lawrence, even though he's disappointed in the eyes of many, QB 13, QB 12 on a points per game basis each of the last 2 years. So he's been knocking on the door. Last year, 339 rushing yards. He's been a 7.0 yards per carry type of quarterback and a guy that takes off in the red zone, which is good for, touchdown opportunities. 8th amongst qualified quarterbacks. You can find that over at playerprofiler.com. Another thing in the passing game that I think might correlate to better production from Trevor Lawrence. Last year, he was 8th in deep ball accuracy and 12th in deep ball completion percentage. So he can spin it deep, and the Jacksonville Jaguars went out and got not 1, but 2 deep threat, big body, go up and get them type receivers in Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. So with the upside now with these outside receivers, the rushing upside from Trevor Lawrence, and quite frankly, he's getting into the danger zone of being a bust considering the 101 draft capital and the lack of overall, production in terms of the league. this is a big year for Trevor Lawrence. I think he's going to capitalize, given that, and has top 5 quarterback potential in fantasy.
Yeah, super interesting with T-Law, having Kirk out there, having Ingram out there. He has like his safety blankets. ETN could take another step forward, had 58 receptions last year, but it's those big athletic bodies on the outside with Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis. And it's sort of like people in the fantasy community hate talking about Gabe Davis in a positive light, but there's few wide receivers who have given us this kind of big, huge spike weeks where he can just take over a game and have 2 touchdowns, like Gabe's over the past few years. So maybe Gabe Davis can be exactly what he was in Buffalo for Trevor Lawrence. Interesting one, Matty Kiwoom. Now we're going to talk about the running back position. And I think the running back position every year is one where if you can hit big at an ADP win, you're looking great in terms of winning your league. Think about the impact a guy like Kyren Williams had for you last year. Think about the weeks that you were using Devon A-Chain. There's been plenty of these guys over the years that have been massive winners for us. Last year, I believe it was 5 of the top 25 running backs or 6 of the top 25 running back scorers were all guys sort of drafted as RB2s on their own team. So it happens every single year. Let's talk a little bit about it, because last year, the 2 big winners that sort of gave you the whole yearly production, Williams missed some time, Devon A-Chain missed some time. It was Rachaad White and James Cook. And Rachaad White ends up finishing ahead of James Cook, but James Cook did finish inside of RB1 land. The counting stats there, he was stronger in the second half of the season. White, really consistent throughout the whole year, guys. Handled a ton of volume last year and finishing with that very high finish at the running back spot. Both of these guys were heading into year 2. Both of these guys ended up getting drafted as low-end RB2s, like at the end of August, but there were plenty of drafts earlier in the summer where they were going as running back 3s. So let's look at the RB2, RB3 land, low-end RB2s, high-end RB3s that you think could end up finishing inside of like a top 6-7 finish at the RB spot. I'll start out with this one because I'll take a little heat off you guys because it's hard starting out with these. I'll say Jaylen Warren for me really fits into this same category. Right now, he's going right at the end of RB2 land. Last year, Jaylen Warren had 61 receptions. And I think once you cross that 60 running back plateau as a running back, then 80 is in the wheelhouse. A lot has been said about Arthur Smith as a guy who it could be a big impediment for guys like George Pickens. But in terms of running backs, the guy's a running back whisperer in terms of fantasy production. Talk about Cordarrelle Patterson finishing as an RB1. Talk about Tyler Algier having 1,000 yards as a rookie. And then certainly, what he did with Derrick Henry. Jaylen Warren is a different kind of back, but he's dynamic. He has explosive ability. He can make people miss, and he's also experienced in the offense. Jaylen Warren, I think, is the kind of player when you draft him at running back 25 right now on Underdog, he could end up beating his ADP by 15 spots. He could get you an RB10 finish if it all goes well. Cody, back to you.
I'm going to go Zamir White here. This is pretty an easy one, straightforward. I don't love this offense whatsoever. I know there's weaponry on the outside and Adams and Myers and Bowers and Mayer and stuff. I don't trust the offense in totality because of the quarterback position, but I do trust Antonio Pierce force-feeding the rock to Zeus. And Zeus is Zamir White. And in year 3, he's got the 4.40 speed coming from Georgia. He's got a lot of tread left on those tires after just a couple years at Georgia with really not a ton of output, literally like 385 carries or something like this in 3 seasons there at Georgia. This is, I think, his one opportunity now, age 24, right at the precipice of, running back drop off. He's got enough tread there to, I think, break out and have an opportunity to vault up just based on force feeding because Alexander Madison's behind him. I think Dylan Lobby earns some of those receiving role snaps and targets, but Zamir White's going to be that lead back in this offense. And it feels like it's pretty apparent coming through training camp, coming through mini camp right now, that's who they're going to lean on. He's going off the board right now, I believe, at running back 21. So right around Najee and Ramondre Stevenson. And I like him to be a guy that can kind of sleep his way into the top 10.
Volume is king. And at the end of the day, I think you're right. If you look at that backfield, it's Alexander Madison, Dylan Lobby, Amir Abdullah still there. There's no one that's really a threat for a 250 plus carries besides Zamir White. And they didn't do anything. They had opportunities in the draft to bring in some guys we like. They had opportunities in free agency to bring in somebody maybe a little bit more high profile than an Alexander Madison. So, Cody, I love that call. Zamir White. Matty, we both went with year 3 backs, Jalen Warren and Zamir White. Which way are you going?
So this running back is a little bit later than this criteria, but I think his counterpart, who's going at running back 26, we could see the ADP flip-flop. So I'm going with running back 36 right now, Chase Brown, Kitty Cat Brown for the Bengals. I think it was Davis Maddock, right? On the Dynasty Life, was explaining why he loved Zach Moss.
No, he's on the Chase Brown. Davis is on. Was
that Coop?
There's a bunch of people on Zach Moss, but I think Chase Brown is sort of like, I think
Alex fucking Dunlap.
So it's funny, Matty.
Yeah,
it's funny you bring this up because I think there's a lot of people on the Zach Moss train right now. I think Zach Moss. There's a chance Zach Moss could score a ton of touchdowns. But at the end of the day, continue with what you're talking about with Chase Brown because he is dynamic.
Yeah, but it's essentially the reasoning behind either running back, from what I gather from most people, is it's the Joe Mixon. What Joe Mixon has done in this Bengals offense. And I think you could just apply that logic to a guy like Chase Brown, who's super athletic. We see him, pop off the screen in speed, 40-yard dash, agility, burst. He's a strong kid. He's a little undersized at 5'10", 210-ish to be a full-on bell cow, but I think his efficiency metrics are strong enough that if he sees that uptick in production and gets the strong side of a running back platoon in Cincinnati, this is a guy who could cash in his ADP big time as a running back 3 even and get you inside that running back 1 range.
Yeah, I love that one. I mean, I think that's like, if you're rooting on one of those guys to have like the highest, outcome fantasy wise, it's Chase Brown with the receiving ability. Such a small sample size, but he does sort of fit the box of like the lighter back who's extremely fast, who can catch the ball. We've seen those guys sort of hitting. Let's talk a little bit about this year's David Montgomery. So last year, David Montgomery was drafted as an RB3, and he ends up in points per game finishing as an RB1. Did not finish as an RB1 in the counting stats because he missed some time, but RB1 in terms of the points per game. So who are we looking at, guys? A RB3 who could give you a David Montgomery-like outcome. Let's start with Matty Kiwoom on this one.
This is a bit boring guy, but I think that's what we're looking for. David Montgomery,
yes.
A subpar athlete, went to a situation where he was given the ball in advantageous opportunities, a lot of touchdowns, he cashed in. I'm looking at Devin Singletary right now, going to the New York Football Giants, running back 32 off the board. We love Tyrone Tracy. We love what he brings to the table, but he's a rookie without a whole lot of experience. And Eric Gray, despite what the trash man thinks, that he's there, and he's there. That's all I can say. He's there. Guys, he's there. I don't know what else to say about Eric Gray. So Devin Singletary, stumbles upon a 72% opportunity share as it finishes in the top 8 in that metric. He was pretty good last year for the Texans. He finished inside, he finished as a running back 1 on multiple occasions in an offense. And, I went with Daniel Jones earlier. We've talked about Malik Nabers. If this offense isn't, gangbusters, it's not the greatest show on turf 2.0, but it's better than expected. These guys are going to have better season if Devin Singletary is the bell cow for the Giants as they develop, the Tyrone Tracy's in that room or whatever. He might mess around and get you that running back 1, running back 2 for high end running back 2 season. So at running back 32, give me a little bit of Devin Singletary, just a little bit.
I love the Devin Singletary answer. I'll say one for me that sort of checks off the box, and it's actually very similar in the bet. This player was also, like last year at the time, Jahmyr Gibbs was certainly holding back David Montgomery's ADP and creating like a discount. Eventually, Montgomery moved up a little bit when the summer moved along, and it became like a let's bet on both running backs, and that was the correct one. But it's James Conner. James Conner has a rookie running back that's holding him back in terms of his output. And I'm a huge Trey Benson guy, but if Trey Benson is slow out the gate and the Arizona Cardinals take this big step forward, James Conner last year had 9 touchdowns. He had over 1,000 yards rushing. Anytime there's like the Arizona Cardinals do something like team-wise where they're hyping their team, it's a New Jersey, anything comes out, it's James Conner they're hyping up. Take that for what it's worth. I don't think James Conner is long there, but much like David Montgomery, James Conner can also miss some time with where you're drafting him. He could give you 10 starts, and you're probably pretty good. But I think it's going to be a similar outcome. I think James Conner in the games that he starts next year could give you RB1 production. And I still like myself some Trey Benson, though. Cody, who you got?
I thought you were going to go to the one I'm going to go with, but I did want to name drop the Zach Moss thing. You guys brought it up. We kind of glossed right over it, and you're like, man, I think he could fall in for a lot of touchdowns. I think the Cincinnati thing is disgusting, but that makes a lot of sense for Moss to kind of fit into that Montgomery role. And if he falls in for 10 touchdowns, you know exactly what that does to his points. It vaults him right up the old ticker. So I'm going to go Tony Pollard, though. You also brought up another running back in the backfield to suppress the cost or suppress the rise of another player. Tyjae Spears, running back 34, Pollard, running back 29. I think having Spears in that backfield is having drafters a little worried about the Tony Pollard thing, and him going off the board right now, running back 29. And what we've seen from Tony Pollard over his career, last year finished as running back 14, and he looked his worst season of his career. He averaged 4 yards per carry, down a yard and a half. And now he gets a counterpart. He gets a counterpart that we know cannot be leaned on. We know they cannot lean 200 carries or 200 touches into Tyjae Spears, but we do know that they can give Tyjae, 80 to 100 carries. He can have 30 to 50 receptions in that area. He can take a little bit, but he can't take it all. We know Tony Pollard can take 180 to 220 carries in a split backfield with two dynamic guys in an offense that we think is going to be more wide open with Will Levis, more receivers, a little bit better offensive line. This is a smash spot for Tony Pollard. I love both these backs, but if I have to draft one, and I will be drafting this one, it's Tony Pollard this year, because everything we thought we knew and we loved about Tony Pollard in Dallas when he was young with Zeke, he's now in the Zeke role, and Tyjae Spears is now in the Pollard role. This is what we waited for. This is what we hoped upon. And now Pollard's going to be here, 215 pounds. One last run. Don't forget to draft Tony Pollard.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I know Evan Silva is also on the Pollard train right now, sort of for a lot that you're talking about, Cody. But I had Tyjae Spears ranked as RB4 in my handcuff rankings. Like, he's way up there. But I think at the end of the day, I think they bring in Tony Pollard for a reason. Maybe it's they don't trust Tyjae Spears to take on more volume. And maybe Tyjae Spears' role is what it is. I'd like to think that Tyjae Spears is going to have a little bit more of a split. But I think if you're right, and this offense does take a huge step forward, Will Levis is doing what you're talking about. Tony Pollard could get like his revenge. Last year, crushed teams where you had to draft him, where he was like a late first-round pick. Now people are sort of like, I think he's dust. A lot of people are on that. So I like that one. Let's talk about mercenaries, though, guys. This helps our Dynasty listeners. This helps our best ball listeners. Certainly helps our redraft listeners. But we've had back-to-back seasons of mercenary running backs. And when I talk about a mercenary, I mean a guy sort of a one-year wonder, a sort of like a one-year hit. Now, Raheem Mostert certainly is not a one-year hit. He was RB25 in 2022, but he was RB2 last year. Perfect example of an older back where it just threads the needle and crushes it. Gus Edwards last year finishes RB25. Again, not nearly the same outcome, but he still had 13 rushing touchdowns. And I think the ultimate example of this is Jamal Williams in 2022. Jamal Williams finishes inside of RB1 land. Jamal Williams is going insane with the rushing touchdowns. And again, he was drafted behind DeAndre Swift. So let's talk about an older mercenary back. And you can go any way you want on this answer, because I gave you the Raheem Mostert RB2. I gave you Jamal Williams, low-end RB1, or I gave you Gus Edwards, like just, fringe RB2. I'll start out with this one, and it's disgusting. And I hate talking about this. This is 2024. This is 2024, and I don't even want to say it. But guys, it's Zeke. It's Zeke Elliott.
That's it.
Zeke Elliott.
Zeke
Elliott is your mercenary. He's your mercenary.
That's a sweep.
Yeah,
all the way
it's
through.
a sweep.
So what's a sweep? So Zeke Elliott last year, it's sort of a Mandela effect where people think about how many touches did Zeke have last year? And you guys know, it's 230 plus touches last year. Like, people think Zeke was like just not touching the ball. Like, Zeke had 230 touches. 2 years ago, he had 12 rushing touchdowns. Why can't Zeke Elliott have 195 carries and fall in the end zone 12 times and catch enough passes that, like, he gets, like, let's say all he needs to do is have 35, 40 receptions, fall in the end zone 11 times, and Rico Dowdle can kind of like be like the change of pace, mix him in, keep Zeke fresh. But you know it. Every single fan at AT&T Stadium will stand up. It'll be the goal line. Dak Prescott loves Zeke. Everybody there loves Zeke. Jerry Jones loves Zeke. And Zeke just falls in the end zone a bunch of times this year. It's disgusting to talk about it, but I think it's the answer.
Zeke
The
had
only way-
51 receptions last year, guys.
51.
51
51.
receptions.
So this is a sweep.
This is a sweep. The only way it's not a sweep is if Dallas brings in Adrian Peterson. Then it's not a sweep. Then I might lean Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, or Eric Dickerson, or literally anyone.
Herschel Walker's on that list. I think like there's a lot of them that I think you could bring back to Dallas.
Well, legitimately, I'll throw out the name Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert, like a back like that.
Yeah.
Like that, like Khalil, like you're not getting excited about that. Like I think Khalil would be if they go through the next month and they say we have, we don't really trust these two guys. We've got to bring in one more guy who can handle some volume, then I'll worry a little bit. But right now with Rico Dowdle and Zeke Elliott, plus the way if Zeke had signed with somebody else, even a really good team, he wouldn't have been the answer. But the fact that it's like the homecoming, welcome home Zeke, all the Zeke Elliott jerseys out in the stands again, it's like it's too good. It's just too good. Let's finish with we have two more to go. Kyren Williams. This year it's Kyren Williams. This is hard. This is really hard. Unlike our Rachaad White and James Cook outcomes, Kyren Williams was like a late pick. Like if you were drafting an NFFC, FFPC round 17, you'd start seeing Kyren Williams. So we're talking about bottom of the barrel backup running backs. Who could be a guy that you could see light the world on fire, thread the needle, and have this huge outcome? I'll say the best answer I've heard on this one, and it's a Dynasty Life. I had Ryan Heath on, and he made the statement that it's going to be Kendre Miller this year. Kendre Miller's this year's Kyren Williams. But that's a hard ask. I mean, Kyren Williams being RB20 this year would be a huge ROI. This is a tough one. Matty Kiwoom, take it though. You got to give it to us.
Taking this running back, you got to have one thing, and that's faith. You had faith last year in Kyren Williams and his 4.8 speed being productive in the NFL. You needed another player to be moved out of the way because last year at this time, Kyren Williams coming up the board at running back 52. Cam Akers was in the 20s. So that was the guy you had. That was the guy you had to surpass. This year, Antonio Gibson's coming off the board at running back 50. Ramondre's coming off much higher. But Antonio Gibson was brought in on a multi-year deal. Antonio Gibson has the size at 6 feet, 230. He has the pass catching ability where he can absolutely eclipse and really put down some massive, production, some surface stats, because we've seen him now have 3 consecutive seasons of 40 plus catches. And we just talked about Zeke having 51 in New England in a lame duck offense. So 50, 60 reception upside is there for Antonio Gibson, regardless of Ramondre Stevenson. But if Ramondre Stevenson gets hurt, just like he did last year, just like he kind of did in college, it opens the door for Tony G to absolutely come in and smash ADP. And I'm president of the fan club, boys, and I got some spots on the bandwagon. So any of the press coverage listeners want to hop on the Tony G bandwagon, give your boy Kiwoom a call because we got some room.
Matty Kiwoom's going to have a Antonio Gibson jersey right behind him next time he airs the game plan. It's going to be wearing that thing. Cody, who you got?
You already said it already. Can I pull back to my late 2000s WWE? It's a Mr. Kendre. That's who it is. It's Kendre Miller. That's what we're talking about here. Mr. Kennedy right there. If you don't know, you know. It's Kendre Miller, period, point blank. Everything we've heard coming out of the Saints is from Nick Underhill, who's maybe the most trustworthy reporter in the country, is that New Orleans wants to focus on Kendre. Kendre wasn't healthy last year, and now he gets a full offseason in this backfield. Alvin Kamara's, got a half, maybe 2 feet out the door at this point. He's good, but they need to move on. They need to get more cap relief, and it's coming down the pipeline. And the faster it happens, the faster they're happy. Kendre in this backfield, running back 44 right now. We loved him last year. We love him this year. And we're getting even more of a value right now where you're going to be able to get him in these home leagues in round 12, 13, 14. Like you said, you're going to be looking at these high stakes leagues where he's going to fall to 16, 17, 18. And people are going to say, I don't want Alvin Kamara's there, man. You know how it's going to course correct. And Kamara's still there. We're going to take Kamara. And it's going to push Kendre Miller down.
I like that one. I'm going to go right around the same ADP as Kendre Miller. One thing I think people are not talking about, I think the Cleveland Browns offense is going to be better this year. I think the Cleveland Browns offense is going to be more aggressive this year. And I think Nick Chubb, there's an outside shot that Nick Chubb just is not going to ever be the exact same player. I think there's all this hope in the drafting community. Nick Chubb is RB 37. Nick Chubb, we're talking about a guy who is not on the field. He's not working out. In football wise, They're hoping to get him, onto the field, by the end of training camp. But there's literally zero timeline for Nick Chubb. Let's say Nick Chubb comes back and can't do it. Jerome Ford last year had 1,100 combined yards. Jerome Ford had 9 touchdowns, and Jerome Ford had only 44 receptions with all that outcome. I think Jerome Ford is a guy who, if there's a setback to Chubb and this becomes a Jerome Ford offense with Ken Dorsey as a more aggressive play caller, with Jerome Ford's big playability, it's probably Kendra Miller, but Jerome Ford, I'll throw his name out there too. It's an interesting one to look at. Guys, let's pivot over to the two. Oh, I got to go one more. We'll go lightning round on this one. We had in 2022 a thread the needle season by Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs played in the first game of preseason. The whole idea was Zamir White's going to take over right now, baby. Josh Jacobs was left for dead. There was high stakes drafts in the FFPC and NFFC where the guy fell to like the 8th round in early September, late August. In home leagues, the guy was going as like running back 24. Ends up finishing as RB1 overall. So we're going back in time to 2022. Is there a dead zone back, a low-end dead zone back that could thread the needle and have the ultimate outcome season, guys? We've already said a lot of guys. So you can double tap here. Matty Kiwoom.
What exactly do you describe? What's the dead zone to you? Give me the definition of the dead zone.
So I think the classic dead zone response would be rounds 3 through 6. Okay. Rounds 3 through 6 running backs. But it gets more nuanced because nowadays people can say
moves
it's
around
round 4.
That's why I wanted to make sure I was just in the right area.
We'll give you for this purpose, let's go round 3 to round 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with, I think if he meets a lot of the criteria, I'm going Najee Harris for Pittsburgh. A successful Arthur Smith offense relies on a brute force running back. Najee Harris is that guy. They did not give him the 5th-year option. I think you're getting a discount on that. But what that means to me is that the Pittsburgh Steelers are ready to run Najee Harris, and run Najee Harris. 3 consecutive years of 1,000 yards rushing, and I think you see 4.
Yep.
Cody Carpentier.
Yep. I love Najee. That's my guy. And he hits the Jalen Warren factor next to him. Everyone in the world thinks Jalen Warren's the next thing, including all the reporters at Steelers camp. And the one thing is, I've said this 100 times, doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what I think, it doesn't matter what the reporters think, doesn't matter what the fans think. It matters what one single person thinks, and that's Mike Tomlin, and he loves Najee Harris. The other one that I'll just drop in here is Aaron Jones. I love Ty Chandler this year. I think he's a value, but I think Aaron Jones sits in a peculiar spot where he could take on, we're talking 80 targets out of the backfield with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback.
This is a really difficult one, and obviously I don't think that there is a RB1 overall outcome out of this range of player.
Correct.
I do think that you brought up Antonio Gibson. One thing that I think is interesting is Ramondre Stevenson, just because the coaching staff seems to like him. I think Mondre in a contract year, the volume could be there, Matty Kiwoom. And Mondre did have 1,500. He had 1,500 combined yards 2 years ago. And they have so many new faces at wide receiver. Even with Antonio Gibson mixing in, Mondre could, if the offense is a little bit better, I mean, it's mental gymnastics here, guys. Mondre could beat his ADP. That's all I want to say. Will not finish as RB1 overall. Let's go to the tight end spot. Tight end is super fun. Let's talk about this because it's this year's Sam LaPorta. And last year, LaPorta ended up getting drafted around like tight end 14 range. So we'll throw this out the window, but it's sort of let's talk about our expectations for Brock Bowers here, because I think we're all going to say the only one who could have a LaPorta-like outcome is Brock Bowers. I like Ben Sinnott, but Ben Sinnott is not going to give you anywhere near to that sort of production. Brock Bowers, though, if it's all said and done, he can carve out a way to, compete for number 2 targets in Vegas. I think Brock Bowers could end up giving you a top 5 season out the gate. And now you're not necessarily talking about LaPorta, but in terms of spike weeks, I think Bowers could really, really do it. Cody, let's take it to you. You talked a little bit on the pre-show, and if you have anybody else to share in this argument, go for it.
I'm just gonna say screw it. I'm just gonna kick the can. You talked about Sinnott, you talked about Bowers. Screw him. You know what? I want the athletic guy. And you guys, I brought up Nabers at the beginning. I want to know what his stat line is. Matty brought up Daniel Jones. Give me Theo. 6'6", 260. You're getting him in the dead last round. He's going to go undrafted in all these high-stakes drafts. He's not going to get drafted in anything. He's going at literally the bottom of the barrel right now. And he's athletic. He's an athletic donk, and that's exactly what you want the tight end position. You guys have him best comparable to Luke Musgrave, a player profiler. He's young. He's from Penn State, early 4th-round pick. That's important, being the early 4th round, the most athletic tight end in the class. And another most important thing here is there's not a lot of people to throw the football to in New York that are decent at football. And we saw at the Senior Bowl that Theo Johnson is better than decent.
Best name in the NFL, but Cody Carpentier, you don't have to be a hero here. You're going real low on the list. Matty Kiwoom, kicking it to you. Anything to add on what we talked about?
I just want to say anything about Brock Bowers. I want to ease the mind of our Dynasty gamers who might not have that rookie drafts yet. Just don't be scared. Don't have the Brock Bowers rookie fatigue. I think that, like you said, the top 5 immediate season is on the books. It's a possibility. And I also want to look at another player in terms of easing your mind, giving you a little comfort. Dalton Kincaid disappointed and went up in our Dynasty ranks. He went up in this year's ADP. He's coming off the board at tight end 4 based on projection, based on who's there. So this is a Dynasty take. So if you could get Brock Bowers in your rookie drafts, if you can get Brock Bowers in a trade, however you get him, don't be so worried. Don't let the naysayers get you down. This guy's sick. This is a guy that was brought in and had an entire offense built around him at 18 years old. And he didn't go to Alcorn State. He didn't go to Appalachian Mountains of the Sisters of the Blind. He went to Georgia boys. And they put together an offense around this kid before he could even drink legally. This guy's going to be a stud.
The utter disrespect for Appalachian State football by Matty Kiwoom.
No. Appalachian powerhouse. State of the Sisters of the Blind. This is this is a cousin school.
It's an NAI I haven't heard about yet. Cody Carpentier knows the guys on that team though. And let's that's a great segue because you bring up Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid was currently the tight end 4 on Underdog, and if Dalton Kincaid has the exact same amount of receptions he had as a rookie, then Dalton Kincaid will break the 2-year record for most receptions by a tight end in NFL history in their first 2 years. But the problem is LaPorta only has to catch like 50, and they'll be 1-2 at the end of the year. But between those guys, Travis Kelce's tight end 2, but tight end 3 is Trey McBride, and I think Trey McBride had a lot of steam, and certainly he's tight end 3. There's a lot of enthusiasm about him, but his season was almost overshadowed by the fact that LaPorta just went absolutely bonkers. McBride was a guy who did hardly anything as a rookie, then starts the year out slow, and then was just winning leagues as a waiver wire ad in a number of redraft leagues. And Dynasty managers who had him, it was like finding a $100 bill in your pants you haven't worn in a year. McBride has just been on a rocket ship in terms of ADP in all formats. I took him in the 2nd round of an FFPC draft the other day, and I felt good about it. Let's talk about this year's Trey McBride, a non-rookie, younger player that you could see taking an exceptional step forward. And I'll say there's really one answer here, guys, for me. It's Luke Musgrave. We saw Tucker Kraft already dealing with a few injuries here. We're expecting the Green Bay offense to take a big step forward. Luke Musgrave will not be the target hog that Trey McBride is, but I think Luke Musgrave, Cody talks about, we want athleticism at the tight end position and the chance of scoring an outsized number of touchdowns. Musgrave is not going to give you a top 3 tight end finish, but I think he could give you like tight end 8, tight end 7. And it's a guy who really didn't do a whole lot of anything as a rookie. Anything to add, guys? You're looking at guys as a younger player could take a big step forward.
Luke Musgrave is the answer. He's the answer. We had kicked around the possibility of going a little ADP arbitrage here in the show, and the guy that I was kind of looking at was Luke Musgrave because he has that type of skill set, athleticism, the ascend. Another name I'm just going to throw out there because I do think he has 8 to 10 touchdown upside. Pat Frymuth. Oh
yeah, Muth is there. Muth, we've seen it though. Like I feel like Muth, it's like people forget just how good he was in that year 2. But I'm with you. I think Muth is a fantastic answer. And I actually think Muth has a higher upside potential than Musgrave because I think he could be the number 2 target when it's all said and done in Pittsburgh. Cody, anybody to add?
I struggled with this one. I struggled finding a legit person to plug into because you remember Trey McBride, right? He was getting kind of suppressed. They brought in Zach Ertz, and Ertz was just kind of there taking away all these targets, and there really wasn't a ton of opportunity. They had bad quarterback play. And I guess the only 2 names that come to mind and these are disgustingly dirty. Greg Dulcich, who I last year, everything I heard coming out of training camp, I talked to some people while I was boots on the ground, and they were like, this guy's not going to be on the roster in a couple of weeks. And he's still on the roster a year later. And the only person in his way is Adam Troutman. And he's a receiving player. He's a receiving tight end. And like, you know who the receivers are in Denver right now. I mean, we're hearing about Devon Vele, the rookie out of Utah, like Josh Reynolds, Troy Franklin, these guys. Like, I think there's a world where he gets opportunity. I'm not sure he breaks out to the level we've seen on Trey McBride. And the other one, maybe my favorite, Matty knows what I'm going to say here. I think we talked about on the Dynasty Buys show the other day. It's Michael Mayer. You can just chew on that one.
How's my man Michael Mayer going to have production when Brock Bowers to the moon, Cody? You're going 2 tight end sets 24/7?
You don't play two. You don't put 2 tight end sets when Brock Bowers is in the slot.
Brock Bowers in the slot got me excited. I hope we have Brock Bowers in the slot, 50% slot rate. I'd love that. Let's
60, 70, 80%. What are we talking about here?
I'm all about it. Let's talk about. We'll just do lightning round on this one. Cole Kmet, last year drafted as tight end 16, finished as tight end 8. This can be anywhere you want it. Just a tight end 2 that you think could very much beat their ADP. Doesn't have to fill any sort of an archetype. Matty, start with this one.
Guys, it's obvious. This year's Cole Kmet is Cole Kmet. He is again coming off the board right now at tight end 16. He's going to be in a high-powered offense. You could see the touchdowns in the red zone being a guy that has the capabilities of catch touchdowns. It's Cole Kmet. Again, back-to-back Cole Kmets.
I'll say gross and disgusting, much like our Zeke Elliott talk, is Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry,
absolutely.
Tight end 17. You get Alex Van Pelt as offensive coordinator, David Njoku, screen. Let's have a couple more manufactured points for Hunter Henry. And also, like we talked about, an opportunity to be a top 2 target on their team. If a tight end can be a top 2 target on their team, they are going to beat their ADP. It happens every single year. Hunter Henry, who got the bag last offseason to stay in New England, safety valve for Drake May. Hunter Henry. Gross, but he'll beat his ADP. Cody.
That's it. It's Kmet and it's Henry. Those are the 2 names that I had written down. You listed one, you listed the other. Those are the 2 answers. I love Henry. I think the most, just given how many targets are going to be available for a veteran like him with a lot of young guys in that room.
If you're enjoying this episode, smash the like button. We're going past an hour here, guys. I told Cody and Matty I'd get them out of here. I'm not. I'm keeping you in because we still have wide receiver to go. Wide receiver is always the really fun one. Let's start out with a softball one. Last year we saw Mike Evans right around wide receiver 35. Again, we talked about Baker earlier. Nobody wanted to draft Bucks for a while. We talked about Rachaad White, get all these Buck discounts, but Mike Evans was like right around wide receiver 35. The year before, he was a 1-2 turn pick. He ends up not covering his ADP in 2022, and then in 2023 was just like incredible. Then you get Michael Pittman Jr., who was actually drafted right outside. It was like a high-end wide receiver 4 for a lot of the summer, being drafted like wide receiver 38. So Mike Evans, Michael Pittman Jr. Michael Pittman Jr. ends up finishing high-end wide receiver 2. Mike Evans obviously leads the NFL in touchdown receptions, easy, top 6 wide receiver finish. I'll go first on this one. Actually, you know what? Let's kick it to Matty Kiwoom. Matty Kiwoom, because I didn't have you go first last time. Go ahead.
I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson, wide receiver 45 right now. Last year in Carolina, despite being a terrible offense, Thielen still went over 1,000 yards. Dave Canales is coming in with the project to fix Bryce Young. That is going to mean easy targets, dump offs, big time volume going to the guy that's going to be the most QB friendly receiver. That is Deontay Johnson.
And I'm going to go a little deeper down the list. And the guy who we're talking about is being drafted as a wide receiver 4. Cody Carpentier talked about Will Levis at length. Last year, DeAndre Hopkins had 75 receptions, and he had 7 touchdown catches, and he went over 1,000 receiving yards in an offense that hardly passed the ball. Will Levis, in his breakout game, his first game where he had all those touchdown passes, who was his preferred target who scored multiple touchdowns there, Cody Carpentier? I believe it was DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is getting a discount right now in ADP because of the Calvin Ridley signing. And also just sort of the people don't know what to do with the Tennessee offense. But DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 44 could legitimately beat his ADP by 30 spots, guys, by 30 spots. I think he could finish inside of wide receiver 15 land. He's an easy click for me in all formats. I even like going and getting him as a mercenary wide receiver in Dynasty right now because I just think at the end of the day, if Tennessee is going to pass the ball at the volume that we think they're going to pass it at, then how is DeAndre Hopkins wide receiver 44 right now? It makes no sense to me. Cody Carpentier.
This is going to be my most drafted player in the 2024 season. He's going off the board right now. Wide receiver 38. We've seen him 1,000. He does it. He does it there. He does it here. You asked the question, who's drafted in this area that Mike Evans and Michael Pittman were drafted? And Mike Evans is the keyword here. I'm staying in Tampa. The answer is Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin, 28 years old. He's a couple years removed from injury, and he's entering a contract year where we could look next spring at Chris Godwin being a $30 million receiver. We know what he was when he came out of college at Penn State. We know what he is right now, and he's moving outside. They moved him into the slot this last year. It did nothing. Sorry, they moved him outside from the slot last year. It did nothing besides give him 300 more air yards. It suppressed him from a touchdown perspective. He dropped down one. He had one more yard, 20 less receptions, the same amount of targets. He's going back inside. He's going to get peppered. He's going to score touchdowns. And Chris Godwin will finish in the top 15 at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I mean, slot rate is the big argument there. Like, the guy was 50% plus, and then all of a sudden they drop him down to like 30. Yeah, I think it could be a dead cat bounce. I've heard some smart people on Godwin. You and Andrew Cooper certainly. Billy Muzio's off of Godwin, so it's a Cody versus Billy straight up right here argument. Guys, let's keep this thing going. This is a lot of fun. I'll give you a really fun one. This is last year we had DJ Moore, and DJ Moore is a guy who like every single person is like DJ Moore is awesome at football. He's awesome at football, but he's being held back by his quarterback play. All of a sudden, his first year in Chicago, he has his career season, gives us a wide receiver 6 overall season. He was just fantastic with Justin Fields, who is a veteran player who we think is good, that's going to have their best season ever. Matty Kiwoom.
I'm going with a year 2 receiver. Right now, he's wide receiver 25 off the board. Zay Flowers for the Baltimore Ravens. He does 2 things extremely well, and it's 2 things that makes you extremely good at football and playing wide receiver, specifically getting open and winning routes. He was 7th in target separation according to Player Profiler, and he was 6th in route win rate. I always sound like Elmer Fudd saying that statistic. It is a tongue twister. Route win rate. He was 6th, but he was also 6th in win rate versus man coverage. So mano y mano, Zayway was getting open. Year 2 jump, I think we see that yards per route run spike go way up from the 1.67 that we saw last year, and I think he's a mega producer in year 2.
Could you repeat that metric again, Matty Kiwoom? I didn't catch it.
Route win rate. Only way I can say it like going blah, blah, blah.
Is your tongue attached to the bottom of your mouth? Or did you get that thing clipped?
Route win rate? It's not like a crazy
route win rate. I can't route win rate. Wow, oh, I did there. Wow, breakthrough, boys. A little break. Route win rate. See, route win rate.
I love Zay Flowers season. I love that you guys are so bullish on Zay. I was very bullish on Zay heading into the show. Even more when you guys are both agreeing on these guys. I love when all 3 of us agree on something. But I'll say one player that I think could have it's sort of like we've been waiting around. This player every single year gets 75 receptions or more. Every year gets 1,000 receiving yards or more. This is a guy who's been a team leader for years. He is beloved by a fan base. And much like we saw with DJ Moore, you put a mobile quarterback next to him, the offense gets opened up, and this player ends up having a career year. Right now, it's F1. It's Terry McLaurin. This is a guy who's going to end up having the best season he's ever had at like 28, 29 years old. Everybody loves him in Washington. Magic Johnson's like taking him out to lunch, seeing how everything's going. Like, this is the team leader. This is the guy that everybody's rooting on. And the fact that they bring in Ben Sinnott, the fact that they bring in Luke McCaffrey, these are not threats to Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin very much has his role on the team. If Jaden Daniels returns the type of value that we think he can this year, I think you're going to see a career year out of F1 Terry McLaurin. Now, whether that's wide receiver 1 land, I don't know. But I think top 15 wide receiver, and you're getting him at wide receiver 31 is in the range of outcomes. Cody Carpentier.
This one's easy for me. I'm going to Pittsburgh here. When you talked about a mobile quarterback going to an offense that can open it up. Najee Harris, we've talked about before. They lose Deontay Johnson, which is a massive target getter. There was a question that you had on the show sheet that revolved around rookies and one being very good. I thought Roman Wilson fit the spec to be very good rookie this year, but he is not on Tyler Lockett's level. With that being said, Russell Wilson, the quarterback here, when he was in Seattle, he was given DK Metcalf 129 targets. Something George Pickens hasn't had is 129 targets. He's at 84. He's at 106. He's averaged almost 16. He's averaged 18 yards per reception. He hasn't had that true super breakout, and I think it's coming this year with 140 target season, 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns. George Pickens is being drafted right now as wide receiver number 28. Again, another one that's just superiorly set up to succeed. He doesn't have the speed that DK does, but he has a better catch radius. He has better hands. He has better separation skills in and out of breaks than DK Metcalf, and it kind of fits that same mold for Russell Wilson, and this is going to be the piece that helps them stretch the defense.
Yeah, I love it, and I think that will be just a tough sight to see for the George Pickens faders and haters. A lot of them out there. A lot of them are not tweeting as much these days, guys, but we know who you are out there.
Bunch of fish.
Yeah,
bunch of fish, bunch of minnows.
100%. I would love to see that from George Pickens. I think the argument is target volume, but I do think he's going to get those deep downfield targets. We saw Cortland Sutton double-digit touchdown receptions last year in Denver. Pickens is a baller. I mean, he's just an incredible player. And at the end of the day, we have seen wide receivers get very high target shares in Arthur Smith offenses. Like George Pickens was like a 20% target share guy last year, 21%. We saw that first year with Drake London was like 28%. So, yeah, let's get George Pickens some targets, fellas. This is obviously a really fun one and one that's a little bit easy. We're going to try to throw a dart here just because when we're talking about ADP wins and you look back at like the last 5 years, Hunter Renfro's wide receiver 1 season was probably the craziest thing we've ever seen. And if anybody doesn't recall this one, this is 2021. Hunter Renfrow finishes as like wide receiver 10. This was people were drafting Darren Waller as the first Raider selected. Josh Jacobs obviously being selected as well. But Hunter Renfrow was a guy that I remember there was this one drafter in the NFFC who would draft him in every single draft. People are taking shots on Henry Ruggs. People were just going out of their way to draft any Raider but Hunter Renfrow. Then Hunter Renfrow would start the season off with like 5-6 receptions every game, 7 receptions. People started at him as a waiver wire addition, and then he just keeps doing it all season long. Is there a completely undrafted wide receiver that you think people are going to be kicking themselves and at least will be a waiver wire signing, a waiver wire addition mid-season? Matty Kiwoom, favorite undrafted wide receiver?
In the notes, you used the term sicko level, so I went straight up sicko level. And I went with a guy that ironically was named earlier in the show, which is kind of crazy that he came up, that Cody talked about him. But it's Devon Bailey, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos. He's getting a lot of praise in the OTA sessions there, playing with Bo Nix, playing with Stidham, making plays. He's being compared to Mike Thomas in terms of his role. He's being compared to a guy that could burst onto the scene like the accountant Tim Patrick, his teammate. And when you look at this wide receiver room, if they were to move on from Sutton, it becomes Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims. There's a whole lot of uncertainty. So if we're going to go sicko, let's go real sicko, boys. Devon Bailey, no ADP. So let's just call it on the bottom.
It's disgusting. And a little known fact is Devon Bailey is younger than Amari Cooper. I mean, he's older than Amari Cooper and older than Velus Jones. So, Matty, he's like a 26-year-old man out there. Yeah. Cody Carpentier, skip this one or answer it.
I'll answer it. And the OG player profiler fans will remember one player that I loved in an offense up there in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, to be exact, Quez Watkins. It was just, I loved it because there was nobody there, and he was going to beat out John Hightower and all these dunce wide receivers. Everything we've heard so far through minicamp, which everything in minicamp you should take for gospel, so I'm going to take it for gospel, is that this wide receiver 3 spot in Philadelphia is Parris Campbell's to lose. Parris Campbell turns 27 here in the next month, 4.3140, still on the books. 92 targets in 2022, played all 17 games. Parris Campbell in this Philadelphia offense, I'm selling you guys on it. he's finishing as a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football because there will be no injuries. This offense is just going to score 44 points per game. I think it's going to be a hyper efficient game. Okay, that was a little hyperbolic right there. But Parris Campbell's my guy. We're going to go sicko mode. I'm going Parris Campbell.
I'm going to skip this one. We're going to keep going, guys. We're already we're at an hour and 15, and I think we jumped the shark with Vele and Parris Campbell. So shout out to my producer Emerson. Let's buffer out this whole segment. But let's go with guys. Let's go with a fun one. Let's go with this year's Nico Collins. And Nico Collins, finishes as wide receiver 12. Obviously, Tank Dell missing, the significant portion of the season helped with the finish. But anyway you cut it, Nico Collins was a massive ADP win. Talking about a guy who was being drafted somewhere in wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 land. Nico was like wide receiver 60 to wide receiver 48 type level, and then he gives you wide receiver 12. So like we talked about with Hunter Renfrow, and like we talked about with Nico Collins, we've seen 2 out of the last 3 years of a wide receiver 1 sort of somewhat out of nowhere. Who could be a player this year with Nico? And last year, Nico was going into year 3, so still a little bit of a youth with Nico as well. Let's start with Cody on this one. Fun one.
I think you got to. I'm just going to name drop some because I think this is a fun area with a lot of guys that are available to talk about. I think Curtis Samuel is interesting in Buffalo. We all are in on. I feel like a lot of us are in on Keon Coleman just being the alpha target getter there. Dalton Kincaid, of course, is a savage. But Curtis Samuel was signed there, and he's going off the board right now at wide receiver 50. JMO, who Dan Campbell's talked about, Dontavian Wicks. I love all 3 of these guys in this area. And I guess if you have to put a gun to my head, I guess I probably just honestly, this is probably the disgusting degenerate one that I shouldn't say. I'm not going to say it.
Say it. What's the vibes you're feeling here, Cody? Let's get these out.
Yeah, keep dragging out this show. That's
you don't have to flag plant this. You don't have to flag plant this, but make a case for this player.
I don't want to make a case for him. I just believe in targets, and everything we've seen to this point tells me this is a wrong thing to say. But where he's going off the board right now, wide receiver 66, Quentin Johnston is a value.
I think that's fine. I think there's actually an argument that Josh Palmer is a value.
Thanks for wasting our time.
Taking a shot on the Chargers non-Ladd McConkey wide receiver of your choice, like Palmer and Quentin Johnston, Cody, are both there for you. And like we're so bullish on Ladd McConkey, and he makes the most sense, but there's no one at tight end, and there's no running back that's going to receive targets. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal. What's the target ceiling for those 3 guys combined in a Greg Roman offense? So end of the day, you have Justin Herbert throwing the ball. I think that Josh Palmer is a good target here. I think, but Quentin Johnston certainly has the pedigree, the athleticism. It's just, is Josh Palmer just better at football than Quentin Johnston in terms of the things that it takes to be an NFL player? Maybe Quentin Johnston takes that big step forward this year and it becomes moot about Josh Palmer. But you could actually do a Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston double tap in most redraft leagues. See how it goes for the first 6 weeks of the season. Would you agree that Quentin Johnston, if you don't see it for like the first 3 weeks of the season, he's a cut? Done,
cut. And that's the other one I was going to bring up was like Cornelius Johnson, who was in Michigan in this Harbaugh offense. Like
that's a Matty Kiwoom special. Matty Kiwoom is the only person in the history of the world talking about Cornelius Johnson.
If Devon Bailey, baby,
if this is like the offense that Harbaugh's imagining, if he wants to bring Michigan to Los Angeles and they really want to suppress everything, you're going to expect a Cornelius Johnson type output from Quentin Johnston, right? But if that's the expectation of playing that role, then they're just going to run Cornelius right next to Quentin and say, hey, Quentin, are you better than Cornelius? And it's going to be probably not. And I think that's where I come into the thing where I'm like, do I trust it? Do I believe that there's enough upside here? I don't know if there's enough upside here, but I think that it's just the going off at wide receiver 66 against around some of these rookies that I'm not sure they're going to garner enough targets. It makes I got to take them a couple times. I just have to and just see what happens.
So I think when we look at the Nico Collins outcome, one of the big takeaways is the quality of the quarterback play. That sort of drove him up. So we want to look for a really good quarterback in this equation. We both talked about it with the Chargers players. Certainly Justin Herbert is a great quarterback, but we talked about Jordan Love. And I think one thing that's interesting is a year ago at this time, the player that we were all talking about that you needed to take in the third, needed to take in the fourth was Christian Watson. Christian Watson had 48 touches as a rookie, and he scored touchdowns on 9 of his 48 touches. Was one of the most explosive, fast, looked like a big Tyreek Hill with the ball in his hands at times. His rookie year highlight film was nasty. Then you combine that with Dontavian Wicks, who's going off the board at wide receiver 60. I think that there is an argument right now in early redrafts, whether it's an FFPC, an NFFC, and certainly a double tap that you're able to do on Underdog. Christian Watson's going off the board as wide receiver 46, and Dontavian Wicks is going off the board as wide receiver 60. I think if there is a one winner out of these two, and one of these guys establishes themselves in a role, whether it's Watson being healthy for 16, 17 games and holding Wicks on the bench, then I think Watson could be it. Watson would be year 3, like Nico Collins, a sort of a post-type sleeper to end all post-type sleepers. But if you are a Watson fader and doubter and non-believer and think that he cannot stand an NFL field, then how is Dontavian Wicks not part of your draft process? Flashed last year. He's a like-for-like. So I like the double tap of the Green Bay wide receivers. It only costs me wide receiver 47 and wide receiver 60. I can walk away with these two together in every single draft. Matty Kiwoom.
Well, I do appreciate both you boys totaling 7 names and leaving me with a ton to talk about. But as a fellow fan of hamstring symmetry, OG, the answer is Christian Watson. There's so many similarities. Coming off the board right around wide receiver 45, good quarterback. Both guys were 6'4", over 210 pounds, good athletes. And one thing that has been forgotten about Nico Collins, his first 2 years in the league, 24 games played. Christian Watson, his first 2 years in the league, 23 games played. The trajectory, the similarities, it's scary, but the comp or the Nico Collins in 2024 is Christian Watson.
Yeah, I love that one. And one thing that's interesting, we're gonna bury. We talk about this like next Puka, next Tank Dell. We're gonna finish the show with that. One that's a little bit more boring is this year's Jakobi Meyers. And I think one thing that's interesting about Meyers is if you ask, anybody who plays fantasy football, where did Jakobi Meyers finish last year in terms of the wide receiver scoring? He actually finished as wide receiver 24 overall in PPR. We go back to 2022, there was Christian Kirk finishing as wide receiver 12. What did both these guys have in common? These were free agent signing wide receivers. So we're going to look for a wide receiver on a new team, whether it was a trade or whether it was a free agent signing that's sort of being devalued right now in the market that could really beat expectations and help you. I think that it's the low-hanging fruit here if we're looking at free agent wide receiver signings. It's Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown, even where he's being drafted, you want to look for a Christian Kirk-like outcome, a guy who could finish as a wide receiver 1, somewhere between 12 and 24 like Myers. I think it could be Hollywood Brown. And I think it's become like a common thing. But Hollywood Brown at wide receiver 33, it just seems like that he could really, really smash that spot. He could give you like wide receiver 18. That's a 15-point ADP win. How could we not like a player like that attached to Patrick Mahomes, regardless of what we think about Rashee Rice and what we think about Xavier Worthy? Like Hollywood Brown's shown on an NFL field. He goes and it's sort of a prove-it deal for him in KC. But he seems like the kind of guy who could gain value and be drafted a lot higher next year than he is being drafted right now. Matty Kiwoom.
I love that call. Just a guy that also fits his criteria that you can get a lot later. Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 69 for Atlanta. He got that similar contract that Gabe Davis got, that Curtis Samuel got. So the Falcons are pretty confident. Coaching staff really expressed how good he is at separating, how underutilized he was, how many times he was missed while open in Chicago. I think he has some sneaky upside. Wide receiver 1 upside, finishing as a top 12 guy like Christian Kirk did a few years ago. I think I reserved that for a Hollywood Brown, someone with tremendous upside. But Darnell Mooney coming in right around wide receiver 70, I think he's going to smash that expectation.
Cody.
I love Darnell Mooney. I actually thought scrolling down far enough would allow you to take like a Calvin Ridley or a Curtis Samuel, who I named a minute ago. I was kind of trying to be nice. I was trying to scroll down, but you just had to come back and get me. I'm going to go 64 here. Wide receiver 64, Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis, everybody hates Gabe Davis year in and year out. I don't get it personally. I get, they don't want to track touchdowns and stuff. The touchdown regression's coming 7, 6, 7, 7 every year. And now he goes down to Jacksonville, where I believe everyone believes in Brian Thomas, who caught a lot of touchdowns, right, at LSU. And Calvin Ridley, who historically has caught a lot of touchdowns and actually had a 1,000-yard season last year in Jacksonville. But they paid Gabe Davis. And Gabe Davis is a vet, and Gabe Davis is going to come in day one better than Brian Thomas. And I think he's going to garner some targets. Again, this guy, 92, 81 targets the last 2 years in Buffalo, attached to Trevor Lawrence. There's a lot of weaponry down there. What better answer than who's this year's Christian Kirk than Gabe Davis in that same offense?
I actually love that. It's contrarian, it's smart, it's well thought out, and you're also taking advantage of people's sort of like the hatred the community has for Gabe Davis. It's not Gabe Davis's fault that he got steamed up to like the 2-3 turn that one season. He had the incredible playoff game, and people were sort of taking him like right alongside Stephon Diggs. That was poor process. But at the end of the day, Cody, you're talking about a guy who scores touchdowns. Who led the NFL in end zone targets last year? Calvin Ridley. So if there's going to be a potential, it's an anti-Brian Thomas take. I'm more bullish on Brian Thomas than you are, but I've heard the criticisms with potentially Thomas struggling in an NFL offense. If Thomas is slow out the gate, a la Quentin Johnston, then you could see Gabe Davis having a weekly role. I also like the idea, Gabe Davis, it's like a coming home. He leaves Buffalo, and where did he go to college? UCF. Now he's playing in Jacksonville, back in his home state. There's a lot of like vibes there with Gabe Davis. I think that's a very, very interesting way. But guys, we're at the end of the show. We got to do it. We've seen Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua is we're not going to try to say that there's going to be a Puka Nacua. If there's a Puka, I mean, this is the answer. If there's going to be a rookie that's going to provide Puka Nacua like stats, then you have to take him in the second round with Marvin Harrison Jr. or the third round with Malik Nabers. Period. End stop. Puka Nacua's season was insane. But let's look at Amon-Ra St. Brown and also Tank Dell. These two guys were a round 3 pick and a round 4 pick that set the NFL on fire for a short segment. Amon-Ra St. Brown, it happened to be during the fantasy football playoffs during his rookie season. Tank Dell was doing it sort of mid-season last year, giving you all those, top 5 wide receiver weeks, average 15 points per game. We're looking at your favorite wide receiver drafted in round 3 or later, and the upside argument for them. I can start if you guys want me to, or if somebody wants to grab this one and go.
You go first.
Okay, so for me, the upside argument for a player that could go absolutely bonkers and score a ton of fantasy points, especially over a short period of time. I'll give you two. You hate when I give 2, but I'll say Jermaine Burton. You're going to see Jamar Chase in the slot, and there's a lot of smart Bengals people thinking that this is the year where, like, Chase has never had over a 25% slot rate, but let's say that Jamar Chase is a guy that gets 40%, and he's a 40% slot rate guy, kind of like we saw, like CeeDee Lamb was a 50+% guy last year, but they basically do that in order to get their best players on the field and manufacture as many touches for Chase as possible. Jermaine Burton basically being on the field full time with that sort of speed, could he be a guy who catches 10 touchdown passes and has spike weeks, and potentially if T. Higgins misses some time, Burton goes nuts? I think Burton has a high upside. Right now, he's being drafted as wide receiver 70. And I'll give you a contingent play. And I hate doing these contingent ones. If somebody gets injured, this can happen because it's sort of a cheap way of doing this. But at least I'm looking at a team. What team in the NFL besides Tennessee has the 2 oldest starting wide receivers right now? Is it the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Is it Mike Evans and Chris Godwin? Let's say one of them gets hurt. Let's say Chris Godwin's gone. What rookie wide receiver would benefit the most? And I'd say for this particular rookie, if either of these guys miss time, I think he could be a guy that is going to be a waiver wire darling, and that's Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan, 3rd-round pick, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think basically I've loved taking him in the 18th round of underdog. The contingent upside that he has is excellent. And if Cody Carpentier is correct that we're going to see Chris Godwin back in the slot, then it's Trey Palmer versus Jalen McMillan. I know Trey Palmer is beloved by you two guys, but at the end of the day, you're talking about a 3rd round pick versus 6th round pick. What player seems like a guy who could command more targets? It's Jalen McMillan to me. Those two guys are interesting, both 3rd round picks. So I didn't go too deep, but two guys I'm looking at. Cody, you start with this one, then we'll kick it to Matty.
I like Burton a lot. I think you phrased that one well with the McMillan take, but I have the same feelings for Burton. I think it would take a T. Higgins trade for Burton to really garner that Puka Nacua upside and get to like a 75th, 80th percent of what we saw from Puka, that 1,400 yard. Like, I think it would take a T. Higgins trade, in August 20th, going to Detroit or something. And then all of a sudden, Jermaine Burton's vaulted up. And the reason that they would feel good about that is because they've seen Burton for a couple weeks in training camp. Boom, they trade Higgins. And I think that vaults that Burton. That's like that same bump we got with Puka as soon as Cooper Kupp was like, oh, he's going to Minneapolis to get his hamstrings looked at. That same bump you're going to see from a guy like a Burton at that stage of the game. I think McMillan's interesting. I think the layup answer is Roman, and that's just on targets day one. Like, you could see, would you be shocked if Roman came into this offense and maybe Pickens didn't do what I said earlier and go from 84 to 106 to 140, instead he stays at the 100 marker, and Roman Wilson comes in, takes all Deontay's targets and some, and all of a sudden Roman Wilson is just this guy? No, I would not be shocked by that whatsoever. I don't think that's the answer, though. The answer to the Puka Nacua is Malachi Corley, and it's obviously the least fringe. It's the chalkiest one, has to be, because it's the first receiver they're on the board in round 3. Malachi Corley is the Yak King, over 2,000 career yards after catch with the Jets now. Mike Williams is there at the receiver position. Mike Williams can't stay healthy. Mike Williams tore his ACL last year. Garrett Wilson's there on the outside. He's a savage. They get Rodgers back. They got an offensive line that's not great, but it's building. You have Rodgers. You have the weapon that can get the ball to this guy. And that is the one thing that Puka did have out there in Los Angeles. That's the one thing that Amon-Ra had in Detroit with Jared Goff. And that's what all these guys have to have, the person getting the ball to the receiver. And I think that Malachi Corley has the highest ability to become this year's mid to late round wide receiver that breaks into the top 24 and completely obliterates fantasy football and the NFL just because of his after catch ability, his massive 10-inch hands, his 215-pound build, that 365-pound bench. If you ain't amped up for that, I don't know what you are. But this is what the Jets need in this offense, is that weapon piece that can go all over the formation. And I guess maybe it's the floor for Malachi, I think, is a Jaden Reed type of a season where they're just going to use him around. He's going to score 6, 7, 8, 9 touchdowns. But I think your ceiling, you're talking about 80th percentile of what we saw from Puka, 80th percentile of Amon-Ra St. Brown, somewhere in there.
I love that. You actually get me really, really jacked up with the Malachi discussion. It's funny. There's no player who has a more wider range of opinions right now in rookie drafts and in Dynasty than Malachi. Like, some people see him as the next Randall Cobb, and some people see him as, like you said, a Jaden Reed. And then there's some people who say this is a guy who's not going to be, he's just going to be like a Swiss Army knife type guy that we're never going to be able to use. So yeah, take some shots on Malachi, an absolute unit. And the whole thing is every NFL player is jacked, man. Malachi's different. He looks different than other NFL players, especially at the wide receiver spot. Cody, he might be the most physically intimidating sub 6 foot wide receiver in the NFL. Matty Kiwoom, take it away with your Javon Baker take.
Cody, why'd you do the Ben Simmons there? You had the layup and you kicked it out for the logo 3 instead of just taking the 2 points. It's Roman Wilson. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Tank Dell. What do they all do? They all run routes. They're all tremendous route runners. Roman Wilson is a tremendous route runner. We saw it at the Senior Bowl. You saw it right there in person, Cody, where he called out Quinyon Mitchell and he beat Quinyon Mitchell. This guy's going to get open. And we've also seen Russell Wilson be very successful with a guy around his size, around his ability, a guy who can get deep as well as, succeed with short routes and Tyler Lockett. So I think that Roman Wilson right now is one of my favorites in terms of the rookie drafts, in terms of rookie receivers outside of the big dogs, the alphas. And Roman Wilson has that upside, and I think his floor, much like you said about Corley, is it's up. It's a pretty high floor given he's in line to be wide receiver 2 in that offense immediately.
It's actually very easy right now to double tap Pickens and Wilson. If you draft George Pickens at wide receiver 28, especially in best ball, Roman Wilson at wide receiver 71, like we talked about, if you get a win from Russell Wilson, both of those guys are going to beat ADP and potentially Muth as well. Interesting one with Pittsburgh. Guys, I told you an hour. We're here at an hour 35. This is the longest press coverage ever, but I could go like 3 more hours. This is one of the most energizing podcasts I've done in a long time. We galaxy brained it, but I think we gave people a lot of great information. Matty Kiwoom, let everybody know what you have coming out.
You can follow me on X at Matty Kiwoom for everything that's going to be coming out. Game plan Saturdays, Trade Gods Wednesdays, the Hurdle on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, TDR Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. You can head over to thedraftrankings.com, get all that stuff as well.
Yeah, make sure you're following Matty and everything that he does. And I'll say one other thing Matty does excellent is Matty does our cornerback rankings. Matty is a absolute ball knower, not just an offensive side of the ball guy. He knows the other side of the ball too. So check out everything Matty Kiwoom puts out here at Player Profiler. Cody Carpentier over at Roster Watch. Check out what he's doing as well. Cody, let everybody know what you have coming out.
Yeah, you can go over to rosterwatch.com, rosterwatch on YouTube. That's where we're doing all of our shows now. The draftrankings.com is where you can catch all of my extra content over there. And then coming up here soon, over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks, I'll be boots on the ground, whether it's the Rivals 5-Star Challenge in Jacksonville. I'll be at the SEC Media Days. I'll be at the training camp tour. I'll go around to 5-6 teams here in August. So we'll have boots on the ground coverage over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. So make sure you're tapped in at Cody Carpentier on Twitter.
Yeah, I love it. And Cody is very much a big respect to you, Cody. There's very few that know as much football as you do in terms of college and NFL combined. You're crushing it, and now you're going to be like a prospect guru by the end of the year as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have coming out over there, not only at Roster Watch, but Orange Bloods as well. Very, very cool stuff. Make sure you're following these two guys. Stick with us here at Press Coverage. I have a number of very, very strong guests lined up for the rest of June. We're going to help you crush your leagues in 2024. We'll see you again soon.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.